The card reader beeped once and the door swung open onto a narrow grey room that smelled of bleach and cedar. A mop handle leaned against the far wall. 2 folded cots rested against wire shelving stacked with cleaning supplies and spare rolls of paper towels. There was no window. The overhead bulb flickered twice before it steadied to a dim yellow that turned everything in the room the colour of old newspaper. Miriam Okafor stood in the doorway and did not move. She held her overnight bag against her side with both hands. Her husband Marcus stood just behind her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, and she felt that hand go very still. This was the room they had been given at the Halcyon Grand. This was what, 22 years of work, $47 million in assessed value, and her grandmother's faith had produced for her tonight. She did not say anything. She stepped inside, set her bag on the floor beside the mop, and turned to look at her husband's face. His jaw was set. His eyes were quiet and careful, holding something in the way a closed hand holds something fragile. He was 44 years old, and he had been an architect for 16 years, and he had sat in rooms full of people who were prepared to dismiss him, and he had never once raised his voice in a professional setting. She could see him making that choice again right now, in real time, in a broom closet on the lobby level of a hotel she owned. Now here is what you need to understand before we go any further. Before we get to what Paulette Wren said 43 minutes later, standing at the front desk in front of everyone who happened to be in that lobby, and before we get to the look on Sandra Pruitt's face when she heard it, we need to go back. We need to go all the way back to a woman named Delia Okafor, to a house in East Point, Georgia, to a kitchen that smelled like chicory coffee and iron skillets, and the particular warmth of a gas stove that had been running since before sunrise. We need to go back to a brass key on a braided leather cord, and to what that key cost, and what it meant, and why Miriam was wearing it under her blouse on the night all of this happened. Delia Okafor was not a woman anyone would describe as wealthy. She cleaned rooms for 31 years. She started at the Peachtree Arms in 1964, when black women who worked hotels in Atlanta worked in the back and entered through the service door and kept their eyes where they were expected to keep them. And she stayed until 1995, when her knees finally made the decision her pride never would. 31 years of corridors and linen carts and the smell of other people's mornings. 31 years of standing in rooms she was not permitted to rent. In those 31 years, she saved every dollar she did not need for survival. She kept the money in a lockbox under the floorboard in her bedroom, in the corner beneath the radiator where the floor had always run slightly warm. Not because she mistrusted banks entirely, though she had her reasons, specific reasons rooted in specific decades, but because she believed that money you could touch with your hands was money you truly owned. She believed a great many things that the world had given her no particular reason to believe. That was the specific character of her courage. She died in 2007, 2 weeks after her 78th birthday, in the same East Point house she had lived in since 1958. She left behind the lockbox, the 3-bedroom house with the gas stove and the warm floorboard corner, and a brass skeleton key on a braided leather cord that had hung around her neck for so long the cord had worn a groove into the brass at the loop. She had bought the key at a junk market in 1971 for 35 cents because she liked the weight of it, she said. Because every door she had ever unlocked for someone else, every supply closet and linen room and service corridor she had opened in 31 years of other people's hotels, she had unlocked with a master key just like it. She thought it was right to carry a piece of that. She left a note with the key, folded into the lockbox between 2 bundles of cash. The note said, "A door locked against you is just a door that doesn't know your name yet." Miriam had been 27 when her grandmother died. She was finishing her degree in hospitality management at Georgia State, the one she had started and paused 3 times for money, and once for grief, and once simply because the cost of continuing had briefly exceeded what she could calculate as reasonable. She finished it the semester after the funeral. She wore the key around her neck at graduation, under her gown, against her skin, because she could think of no other way to bring her grandmother into the room. She wore it the day she sat across from a commercial loan officer at a desk in a Midtown Atlanta branch and laid out the business plan she had written in longhand across 14 composition notebooks over 4 years. She wore it the day the Halcyon Grand's acquisition closed, and the deed carried her name alongside Delia Okafor's estate as co-holders of 63% of the property. The loan officer had been a careful man. He had taken the notebooks and gone through them page by page without speaking. Miriam sat across from him and kept her hands flat on her thighs and watched him read. He asked 4 questions. She answered all 4 without notes because the answers were in her body by then. Not thought, but known. He said he would need to check a few items and would be in touch. She thanked him and walked out and stood on the Midtown sidewalk and pressed her hand over the key under her jacket and breathed until her pulse came down. He called 3 days later. Approved. The hotel had been a failing mid-tier property in 2009 when she bought in. It sat on 2 acres of prime real estate in the old 4th Ward, and it had good bones and a leaking roof and a front desk system that ran on software from 2001 and a restaurant kitchen that had not been certified in 4 years. She poured 4 years of savings, her grandmother's lockbox, and a commercial mortgage into it. She brought in a general manager named Leon Ashby, a white man from Savannah who had 40 years in hospitality and 0 patience for anyone who wasted his time. He had read her business plan for exactly 6 minutes, pushing his reading glasses up twice, and then he had set it down and said simply, "I'm in," as if it were obvious. She had appreciated that he did not make it more than it was. She renovated floor by floor. She kept the original terrazzo in the lobby because terrazzo that old did not exist anymore, and she was not going to be the person who replaced it with something that only looked like it. She kept the brass elevator doors and the 12-foot ceilings in the ballroom and the crown molding in the corner suites. She updated everything that needed updating without erasing what made the place worth saving. It took 4 years and 2 refinances and 1 contractor dispute that required a lawyer, and by the time it was done, she had a property that deserved what it charged. By 2019, the Halcyon Grand was a 4-star boutique hotel with a dining room that had been reviewed favourably in 2 national publications and a 3-month waitlist for the owner's suite on the 8th floor. Room 801. The one with the wraparound terrace and the view of the city lights that on clear nights extended all the way south to the airport, tiny blinking signals rising and descending in the dark. Miriam had not stayed in Suite 801 in 14 months. She did not stay there often. What she did 4 times a year was check in under her married name at the standard rate with no announcement and no advance notice to the staff. She walked the floors. She ate in the restaurant and read the menu the way a guest would read it. She sat in the lobby and observed what was observable. She read every comment card from the previous quarter. She did it the way her grandmother had done her own version of inspection at the Peachtree Arms, which was to show up and pay attention and say nothing until the moment called for words. She had done it the same way for 15 years. Nothing had ever gone wrong. Until tonight. Let me take you back to 7:45 on a Friday evening in October. The lobby of the Halcyon Grand smelled, as it always did on a cool evening, of the eucalyptus arrangement on the centre console and the faint cedar warmth of the reading alcove fireplace, lit at 5 o'clock every night from September through March. The terrazzo floor reflected the overhead chandelier in cool amber panels. 3 guests waited by the elevator with luggage. A man in a linen jacket had his phone out at one of the side tables. The registration desk ran along the far wall, backlit in warm gold, the Halcyon Grand's name in brass letters above. 2 clerks worked the desk, one handling a businesswoman in a charcoal suit, the other standing at the far terminal waiting for the next arrival. That second one was Sandra Pruitt. Sandra had been front desk manager for 2 years. She was 53, brisk, and organised in the way that certain people are organised, which is to say, her efficiency served her preferences. She had strong feelings about which guests warranted her full attention and which warranted the calibrated minimum. She had a method for categorizing arrivals in the first 10 seconds, developed over 24 years across 4 properties. She was very good at it. It had never cost her anything, she noticed. Miriam and Marcus crossed the lobby at 7:45. Miriam wore dark slacks and a cream blouse with a single gold stud in each ear. Marcus wore a grey blazer and carried a folded jacket over one arm. They were not rushing. They moved the way people move when they are comfortable in a space, with the slight ease of the familiar, because this was their space, though only one of them knew that tonight was the night that fact would be tested. Sandra looked up. Her eyes moved once, a quick sweep across both of them. Then she smiled, the calibrated smile she used for these arrivals, the one that lived entirely in the lower half of her face, while the upper stayed professionally neutral. She pulled up the reservation on her terminal. Okafor, she said, reading from the screen. 1 night. Yes, Miriam said. Standard king, non-smoking. Sandra typed. She typed more than a simple look-up required. Her eyes stayed on the screen for a beat longer than the search warranted. The guest in the charcoal suit at the other terminal glanced over briefly and then back at her own check-in. When Sandra looked up again, something had arranged itself in her expression. It was not hostile. It was more precise than that. It was the face of someone who had already made a decision and was now managing the delivery. "I'm going to need to move you," she said. "We have a conference this weekend, and some of our standard inventory has been held for the block. I can put you in one of our lower-level accommodations." Miriam's hands rested on the counter. "We have a confirmed reservation." "I understand that. There was a system adjustment on the inventory, and unfortunately the room that was... The confirmation number is in my email, if you need it." There was a pause. It lasted exactly the length of time it takes for someone to decide they are not going to back down. Sandra did not ask for the confirmation number. She printed a keycard, pressed it into a small paper sleeve with a practice motion, and slid it across the counter. She said the room was on the lobby level. "Turn left at the service corridor, second door past the linen station." She said it with the fluency of someone who had given directions to that room before. Miriam looked at her. She looked at the sleeve. She looked at Sandra's face for exactly one more second, long enough to record it, and then she picked up the sleeve and turned and walked with Marcus toward the service corridor. She did not say anything. She did not argue. She did not announce a single thing about herself. She understood that this was not the moment for any of that. Not because dignity required submission, but because dignity required precision. The moment was not yet. She could feel it the way you can feel a tide before it turns, something in the pressure of the air. The service corridor was narrow, lit with fluorescence that buzzed at a low frequency. The carpet ended where the corridor began, and the floor was bare grey linoleum, worn to a shine in the centre track. Past the linen station, past two housekeeping carts parked at angles, past the smell of industrial detergent and fresh pressed cotton, to the second door on the right. The card reader beeped once. The door swung open onto bleach and cedar and a flickering bulb. She stood in the doorway and she looked at the room and she understood, fully and without ambiguity, what had been done. Not an oversight, not a system error, a decision. Someone had looked at the name Okafor and at the two people standing at the counter and had made a quiet, practiced decision and directed them somewhere no confirmed guest was ever supposed to be directed. She set her bag on the floor beside the mop handle. She pressed one hand flat against her sternum where the brass key rested under her blouse. Here is what dignity looks like from the inside. It is not calm. It does not feel serene. It feels like holding a door shut against a wind that wants very badly to come in. A wind with weight and temperature and the particular sting of something that has happened before and before and before. Miriam stood in that utility room and felt the wind pressing at the door, and she held it. She held it with both hands, with everything in her that her grandmother had put there and everything she had built herself. Marcus sat down on the edge of the folding cot. The frame groaned under his weight. He looked at her without speaking for a moment, and in his face she could see the same things she was feeling, the same wind against the same door held from his side too. "How do you want to handle it?" he said. She thought about her grandmother in a hotel corridor in 1978, her knees on a rubber mat, stripping a bed in a room she had cleaned 1,000 times and was not permitted to sleep in. She thought about the lockbox under the warm floorboard. She thought about 14 composition notebooks and a loan officer reading them without speaking. She thought about a brass key on a cord so worn the cord had become part of the key. "We wait," she said. She did not mean it passively. She had learned from Delia Okafor that waiting was sometimes the most active thing a person could do. You waited because you understood that certain moments required a specific person in a specific place at a specific time, and if you moved too early, you took yourself out of that alignment. You waited because you were not afraid, because being afraid was what they wanted, and you were not prepared to give it. She sat down on the other cot. She did not take off her jacket. She kept her hand over the key. At 8:10 p.m, Paulette Wren came on shift. Paulette had worked the concierge desk at the Halcyon Grand for 11 years. She was 61, deliberate in her movements, and she knew the hotel the way a person knows a house they have lived in for a very long time. She had been a concierge for 27 years across 3 properties in Atlanta, and she had a gift for the kind of attention that most people only performed. When Paulette paid attention to you, she was actually looking. She had met Miriam Okafor in person for the first time at a staff appreciation dinner 9 years ago. The owner had come in quietly, found a seat near the back, and spent most of the evening listening. Paulette had been seated 2 places from her, and they had talked for perhaps 20 minutes about the original terrazzo. She was struck by how precisely Miriam spoke about the building, not with the abstracted affection of ownership, but with the specific knowledge of someone who had stood on every floor and paid attention to what they found. She had seen her twice more in the years since, during quarterly visits. She knew the face. She came in through the side entrance at 8:10, signed the shift log, and went to hang her coat. She straightened her jacket, tucked her reading glasses into her blouse pocket, and walked to the concierge station. On her way, she passed the front desk and said good evening to Sandra, and glanced at the room log the way she always did at the start of a shift, scanning for any flags or special requests. She saw room 014 listed as occupied. She stopped. Room 014 was not a guest room. She'd worked this hotel for 11 years and knew every room number not by effort but by use. Room 014 was a utility room, listed as such in the inventory system for as long as she had been at the Halcyon Grand. It had a mop station and wire shelving and no bathroom. She looked at the name in the occupied field. She looked at Sandra. Sandra was helping a guest on the other terminal and did not look up. Paulette walked to the concierge station and stood there for a moment with her hand resting on the desk, doing a rapid and private calculation she had been doing all her professional life. The calculation between what she was certain of, what she could prove, and what she was prepared to do in the gap between the two. She had no uncertainty about what she was certain of. She picked up the house phone and dialed the extension for room 014. There were 2 rings. Then, "Hello." Miriam's voice was level. No sign of anything except attention. Paulette said, "Mrs. Okafor, this is Paulette at the concierge station. I need you to stay where you are. I'm going to sort this out." There was a pause on the line, brief and careful. "Paulette," Miriam said. "Yes, ma'am." "Take your time." The call ended. Paulette set the receiver back in the cradle. She stood straight. She took off her reading glasses and put them back in her pocket. Then she walked to the front desk. She stood across from Sandra, and she waited for Sandra to finish with the guest at the other terminal. When the guest had their key and had moved away, Paulette said, in a voice that was entirely level, that the guest currently assigned to room 014 needed to be moved to suite 801 immediately, and that she intended to call Mr. Ashby. Sandra looked at her with the expression of someone who had not expected to be challenged. "The owner's suite is reserved for the owner," Paulette said. "I know that. So is this." The lobby was not empty. 2 guests stood near the elevator bank. A man and a woman with carry-on bags waiting for the car to arrive. A bellman was crossing the lobby toward the luggage room. The couple who had been in the reading alcove had moved to the bar area and were close enough to hear a conversation conducted in a normal voice. The man in the linen jacket at the side table had looked up from his phone. Sandra said, "She's a hotel guest. She has a confirmed reservation and I accommodated her." Paulette set both hands flat on the counter. She was not angry. You could not call what she felt in that moment anger, not with the precision this situation deserved. She looked at Sandra for a long moment, the way you look at someone who has just said something that has made the full shape of the problem visible for the first time. "That," Paulette said, "is the owner." The sentence landed in the lobby the way a stone lands in water, in all directions at once. Sandra's face did not change all at once. It changed the way ice changes, which is slowly and then completely. First, the colour went, then the specific set of muscles that had been carrying that expression for 2 years went somewhere else, and what was left was not a face that could be read, only a face that was processing. The man near the elevator had turned. The bellman had stopped mid-lobby. At 8:22 p.m, Paulette Wren placed a call on her personal cell phone to the mobile number for Leon Ashby. The call lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Leon was at the hotel in 19. He came through the lobby doors with the unhurried momentum of a man who had managed crises for 4 decades and knew that the first thing you lost when you moved quickly was the ability to observe. He was 62 and silver-haired, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned long ago that volume was the last tool you reached for and the weakest. He walked to the front desk. He did not look at Sandra immediately. He said good evening to the clerk on the other terminal, and he asked Paulette, who had remained at the desk, to pull the full room assignment log for the evening. He read it standing there, taking his time. He went back to page 1 and read a section again. He looked at Sandra then. Sandra said, "There was a conference block allocation, and I made a judgment call on—" Leon said, "We'll talk about your judgment call shortly." His voice was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that had weight. "Right now, I need to go downstairs." He went to room 014 and knocked. Twice. Evenly. Miriam opened the door. She was still dressed, jacket still on, overnight bag still on the floor where she had placed it. The brass key hung outside her blouse now, resting on the cord against the cream fabric, catching the buzz of the fluorescent hallway light. Leon looked at the room. He took in the mop handle, the wire shelving, the 2 folded cots, the flickering overhead bulb. He looked at it with the sustained attention of someone who wanted to remember it accurately. Then he looked at Miriam. Whatever moved through him in that moment stayed in his face only as focus, as a concentrated and deliberate attention that did not flinch. "Mrs. Okafor," he said, "I am sorry there are no words for this that are adequate, and I am not going to insult you by looking for ones that are. Suite 801 is yours, as it has always been. Will you and Mr. Okafor allow me to escort you up?" It was not a question, but he offered it as one because she was the one who decided what happened next. She held his gaze for a moment. She looked at him the way she had looked at Sandra, fully and without hurry, recording what she saw. What she saw was a man who had not known this was happening and was not minimizing it, now that he did. "Yes," she said. She picked up her bag. Marcus stood from the cot and took his jacket from where he had laid it across the wire shelf and followed her into the corridor without a word. The elevator rose from the lobby level to the 8th floor in a silence that none of the 3 people in it felt any need to fill. When the doors opened, the corridor stretched ahead in deep charcoal carpet and low, warm sconces, and at the far end stood the double door of Suite 801 in pale oak. Leon pressed the keycard to the reader. The lock clicked open. Hold that sound against the other one. The broom closet lock clicking open onto bleach and cedar and a room without a window. This was the same building, the same Friday night, the same technology. One click had been a decision to make a person invisible. This one was the decision undone. Suite 801 was warm. The climate system had been running and the room held the specific, comfortable temperature of a space that had been prepared. Through the terrace doors, left open an inch, the Atlanta skyline showed in the gaps of the October dark, the city lights arranged in their patient permanence below. Marcus set his jacket on the bench at the foot of the king bed and stood for a moment looking at the room with the expression of a man who was allowing himself to arrive. Miriam walked to the terrace doors and pushed them fully open and stood in the evening air. The temperature had dropped since they had driven in. She could smell the particular sharpness of an Atlanta autumn, dry leaves and concrete cooling after a warm afternoon. Below and to the east, the old Fourth Ward lay in its grid of amber streetlights, and somewhere in the middle of it, the house in East Point where Delia had lived was dark and sold, and belonging to someone else's history now, but it was still there. She pressed 2 fingers to the brass key against her sternum. Her grandmother had mopped floors 3 blocks from this building. She owned the building they were standing in. Neither of those facts cancelled the other. Both of them were true at the same time, and the truth of one did not diminish the truth of the other. That was the thing nobody ever told you about arriving somewhere, that it did not erase the road, that the road was still there behind you, its full length, and you carried the weight of every step. Marcus came and stood beside her. His hand found hers at the terrace railing. He did not say anything, and she did not need him to. Leon excused himself after 10 minutes, having arranged for their bags to be properly collected and brought up, and for the restaurant to send a late supper without being asked. At the door he paused and said that he would be addressing the matter first thing in the morning, and that he intended to be thorough. She thanked him and closed the door. That night she sat at the terrace table with the city below her and a cup of tea cooling in her hands, and she thought about patience. Not the passive kind, the active kind, the kind that required you to know, with certainty, that the door would open and to wait for the precise moment rather than forcing the wrong one. The kind Delia had practiced for 31 years. She was not angry. She had been through the anger already in room 014, and she had held it, and now it had passed through her and left something quieter and more useful. She was clear. Clear was what you needed when it was time to make decisions that would hold. Sunday morning, Leon held a brief staff meeting before the breakfast shift. He stood at the front of the conference room off the lobby and he read a prepared statement, concise and precise, confirming that a formal review of a guest accommodation incident had been opened, that the incident involved a confirmed reservation holder who had been directed to a non-guest room in violation of the hotel's accommodation policy, and that the review would be conducted thoroughly and without predetermined conclusions about personnel. He did not name Miriam. He did not need to. Paulette was on shift, and everyone in that room understood that Paulette did not bring things forward without cause and did not keep her voice down when the matter required a normal speaking volume. The review took 3 weeks, conducted by an outside firm that Leon had worked with before, people who knew what thorough meant. They pulled the room assignment log for 24 months and read it the way Paulette had read it, with the focused attention of someone who was not looking for a particular story, but was prepared to read whatever story was there. Room 014 had been used before, not often, but 11 times in 22 months there were guest reservations assigned to rooms that did not appear in the hotel's public booking inventory. The log did not explain the reasoning. It did not need to. The pattern was legible on its own. Sandra Pruitt was placed on administrative leave on the Monday morning following the weekend of the incident. She did not return to the front desk. She submitted a written statement to the reviewing firm in which she described the allocation decisions as good faith responses to conference block pressures. The firm reviewed the conference block records for those 11 dates. 3 of them coincided with no conference. The statement was included in the final report as submitted, with a notation. Her employment was terminated in the 3rd week of November. The letter cited violation of equal accommodation policy. It cited misuse of inventory assignments. It cited conduct inconsistent with the standards of the property. The letter addressed her by her title in the first line, Front Desk Manager, the same credential she had used as the instrument of every one of those 11 decisions. The front desk manager position was posted internally on the Wednesday of termination week. One application was submitted by the following Monday morning. It came from Celia Marsh, who had been Sandra's assistant for 14 months and who had, on 3 separate occasions in those months, drafted written memos flagging irregularities in the room assignment log that she had submitted through the standard internal channel and seen filed without response. Celia had kept copies of all 3 memos, time-stamped, in a folder on her personal work drive. When the reviewing firm requested all relevant documentation, the folder was among the first materials she provided. Celia was 29. She had grown up in Decatur and had wanted to work in hospitality since she was 16, when she had done a school project on the Auburn Avenue hotels that had served black travelers during the decades when downtown properties turned them away. She knew what a halcyon grand quality property on this site meant in the specific geography of the old 4th Ward. She had brought that understanding to every shift. She accepted the position without hesitation. The Halcyon Grand's annual ownership review was held in January, 6 weeks after the incident. It was the first one Miriam attended in her capacity as majority owner, rather than as an incognito quarterly visitor. Leon presented the financial summary for the year, the incident report and the outcome of the review, and the revised accommodation policy, which now required dual authorization signatures for any confirmed reservation moved outside its booked room category. At the end of the presentation, Leon set down the binder and he looked across the table at Miriam, and he said, in the direct manner of someone who did not say things he did not mean, that she had built something worth protecting, and that he was glad the institution had been equal to the test, even if the test had been an ugly one. Miriam held the brass key in her palm under the table where no one could see it. She had taken it off the cord that morning and put it in her jacket pocket, and she had been turning it in her hand throughout the presentation. The small, familiar weight of it, the groove in the loop where Delia's cord had worn into the brass. She said, "My grandmother built it. I'm just the one who was here to open the door." Paulette Wren retired in April on a Thursday, 2 weeks before her 62nd birthday. She had not made any particular announcement about it. She had submitted her retirement paperwork to HR in February, quietly, the way she did most things, and the staff had found out the way hotel staffs find out things, which is through the bellman who overheard the conversation with Leon and told the front desk, who told the restaurant, who told the kitchen, and from there it was simply known. The ballroom was set with round tables, and the chef prepared the food personally, and the staff who had worked with Paulette longest served it. The lighting was warm and low, candles in glass holders along the tables and the chandelier dimmed to a quarter, the room at its best, the 12-foot ceilings and crown moulding and original brass sconces catching the light at the angles that showed them most clearly. Paulette sat at the head table and accepted the attention with the particular grace of someone who has been doing important work quietly for so long. that the recognition feels simultaneously overdue and slightly beside the point. She gave a short speech that lasted 4 minutes and contained no self-congratulation and a great deal of specific gratitude. Miriam presented her last. She gave her the framed photograph, the two of them standing in the lobby after the January review, Paulette in her concierge jacket and Miriam in her coat, both of them looking at something off to the left of the frame, the way you look when someone says your name unexpectedly. She gave her a handwritten note that said what it needed to say in the language of someone who meant it, and she gave her an envelope. The envelope contained a formal letter from the Halcyon Grand, establishing the Delia Okafor Scholarship in Hospitality Management, awarded annually to one Georgia State student in the hospitality program, funded at $12,000 per recipient, in perpetuity as a standing endowment. The scholarship had been set up quietly in November, 2 weeks after Sandra's termination letter was mailed. Paulette opened the envelope and read the letter slowly. Her eyes went bright. She pressed her lips together and looked up at the chandelier for a moment, the way people look when they are trying to keep something from running down their face. And then she looked back at Miriam. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Delia. Just the name. Nothing else." Miriam nodded. Paulette folded the letter back into the envelope with both hands, the way you handle something you want to keep. Miriam watched her and thought about the phone call in room 014, about the voice that had come through the receiver in that narrow, bleach-smelling room saying, "Stay where you are, I am going to sort this out," with no performance in it, just the flat certainty of someone who had already decided. She thought about what it had cost Paulette to walk to that front desk, 11 years at the Halcyon Grand and a direct confrontation with the front desk manager and a call to Leon at 8:30 on a Friday night. Paulette had known every possible consequence and had walked toward the desk anyway because she had looked at the room log and seen a name she recognized and found the choice between acting and not acting to be no choice at all. Not because she was required to, because she had looked. That is the thing about dignity. You can carry it through every room, every corridor, every unlocked door and service entrance and utility closet in the world, and it costs you something every time. There is no receipt. There is no refund. No one is required to notice, and most of the time most people do not notice because the work of holding the door closed against the wind is invisible work by nature. And then sometimes, not always, not even often, but sometimes, one person looks. Not through you and not past you, at what you are actually carrying. They look because looking is a choice. The briefest choice imaginable. A second, a fraction of a second, the moment when you could look away and you do not. Every weight shifts a little when that happens. Not resolved, not repaired, but witnessed. And witnessed is not nothing. Here is what the Halcyon Grand's room inventory says now. Room 014 has been delisted and converted to an actual, properly equipped storage room. A practical one with organised shelving and a supply management system and a door that is never listed as available for guests because it is, categorically, not a guest room and it never was. In the administrative remarks field of the property management system, someone entered a note when the room was officially delisted. They did not sign the note. Leon, when asked, said it was not him. Celia said it was not her. Paulette was already retired by then. The note reads, "Removed from inventory," and below that, "Never again." Room 801 still sits at the top of the building. The terrace still looks over the city. The climate system still runs to a comfortable temperature before the owner's arrival. Miriam is up there 4 times a year, sometimes with Marcus and sometimes alone, always checked in at the standard rate under her married name. Always walking the floors in the morning before the breakfast service, always stopping in the restaurant to read the menu with the attention of a genuine guest, always reading the comment cards. She does not carry the brass key on her body anymore. It hangs in the window of her home office on its cord, which she has replaced twice because the cord keeps wearing, and the old pieces sit in a small tin on the windowsill because she cannot bring herself to throw them out. They are evidence of use. She does not discard evidence of use. She does not need the key against her skin. She knows the door. This is what you need to sit with. Not the Friday night, not the log, not the letter that went out in November, the part before all of that. The 31 years her grandmother cleaned rooms she was not permitted to sleep in and saved money in a lockbox and wore a junk market key around her neck and believed, in full and deliberate defiance of every available evidence, that a door locked against you is just a door that doesn't know your name yet. That belief is not naive. It is not patience in the ordinary sense of the word. It is a specific and expensive and transferable form of courage, the kind that gets passed down in braided cord and composition notebooks and kitchen conversations at 6 in the morning before the rest of the world decides what the day will hold. If someone gave you something like that, if someone built something for you before you were old enough to know you needed it, and the world has been slow to open the doors toward it, that is not the final word. The door does not have the final word. You carry what was given. You show up. You do not announce yourself. And when the door is finally yours to open, you hold it wide, and you say the name of whoever taught you it was possible. If there is a name that belongs in the room with you that hasn't been spoken lately, say it today. That is all this story asks.